Well, welcome. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience here?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Hunton. I'm with IBM, a Vice President of Social and Content Experiences. I've been with IBM for, I guess, about 4.5 years, and prior to that was a part of agency life for the entirety of my career leading up to that. And so I've kind of always been involved in sort of all things creative strategy, and that's led to really a focus in social over the past 4 years. But as we've been transforming the function of marketing over the past year or so, my organization's taken on a bit larger remit to include things like our blog experience and our podcasting experience. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go.
That's excellent. Welcome, Stephen. Hi, everyone. I'm Chapman. I am CMO at Celtra, and I'm excited to talk to Stephen today. I've worked on the edge of technology and creative and media, both agency side and technology product side, and excited to be here and have this discussion about creative transformation. And creative transformation, I was at RGA previously, speaking of agency side, Stephen, and transformation was the big word in talking to most large companies. And there was business transformation, there was digital transformation, and then we would talk about marketing transformation, we would talk about creative transformation. These were all just kind of expressions, right, for really big challenges that businesses had around certain subjects, around reaching certain goals, around changes in the industry, changes in the way the ecosystem and how people are interacting with their brands. What do the words creative transformation mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess creative transformation for me can go a couple of different directions, right? Like one can be just this notion of how do we evolve the way that we go to market with creative content in a way that's going to drive results. Another can be, and I think this has been a big part of our focus, has been how do we transform ourselves over the past 2 years during a pandemic to enable creativity to happen more easily, with less friction when we're working from on WebEx all the time. I mean, I'm constantly amazed by how our teams are able to remain creative despite the fact that they're not working together in person as much, right? And so we've had to redesign systems and change staffing models and do all of these things to kind of like take as many barriers out of the way as possible. But then, the other piece of it has been, what are we going to focus on as marketers? Like we spend an awful lot of time and energy on tactics that may or may not be as valuable as they could be. Some of them are just clearly not working. And so part of it is about using data to inform where our focus lies and where we can spend our limited amount of time and resource to drive a more meaningful result than we can with some other things. So it's a bit about making choices.
It's interesting. I mean, you've brought up two big buckets we could discuss, changing the way you go to market, the way you make content, then transforming people to enable creativity, especially right now, right, during remote work. You talked about staffing models, systems, processes, and then those data-driven, data-informed, what do we actually focus on? We had a discussion, leading up to this, and you brought up the idea of radical transformation.
Yep.
I think we're going to cover some of the buckets you just described and sort of what creative transformation projects you've been working on at IBM. But maybe you could just tell us a little bit about radical transformation.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I've been with IBM for 4.5 years, and one of the things that we've been working on the entire time is really trying to simplify I'll call it our social ecosystem, like all the channels that we leverage across the internet to build connections with audiences. Been trying to simplify that so that it's easier to find, understand, and connect with IBM, right? And so when I joined, we had over 1,800 social media channels globally, and some of those had very large audiences, some had small, size of audience irregardless, like some had different levels of engagement. And so you kind of could see like where things were working and where they weren't, yet we were continuing to do all of it, right? It was just like, hey, it's social, get it out there, put it out on this channel, do whatever. And so there's a lot of like well-intended things going on, but not a lot of impact being driven. And so as we've been kind of trying to evolve the model, like one of the things that I was really inspired by over the last year was our marketing leadership teams brought in some external speakers. And one of them was Meredith Levine from the New York Times, CEO of the New York Times. And they talked about their transformation as a brand. And it was, just as chaotic as a lot of our large enterprises can get, where you've got different business units, parts of the company doing lots of things, and it creates confusion. And so the line that she shared was, anything less than radical isn't enough. And so that really became a marker for us to like be honest about ourselves and to look deeply at the data and have conversations with stakeholders about the things that we see that are working really, really well, but we're not spending enough time leveraging that specific area to drive an impact for IBM, and things that are really, really not working that we sort of turn a blind eye to, right? Like we publish thousands of pieces of organic content a year, and yet 30% of that gets like 0 to 5 engagements or likes per post, right? So the audience is signaling to us with their lack of engagement that they do not want any of those assets. They also signal that they really want some other stuff. And we have a very clear picture of like the types of content that works. And so part of creative transformation for me is about using that and saying, okay, well, what do you need to do to enable our organization to shift like 80%, like 100% would be great, but 80% of your focus to those things that we know our audiences want. Because unless we're like providing things that they want, or like really communicating effectively on the things that we kind of need them to hear in a way that resonates with them, we're all wasting our time. We're wasting their time, we're wasting our time. So that's kind of where it gets down to like the operational models and all the things that we need to do to make it possible.
That's it's a massive when you point it out like that, and I think it's many organizations do this. They publish a lot of content, they have content plans, they go ahead and publish it. There's some engagement, there's big spikes in certain areas, but there isn't enough learning about what worked and then a shift. And I think that creative transformation process of looking at what works and then really being able to make the shift, that's the hardest part of this, right? That's the part where organizations just, either make or break. And I like that, anything less than radical isn't enough. So when posed with that information, this is working, this is not, we have to make a big shift. It sounds like one of the transformations that IBM has gone through is the centralization of resources, to basically centralization of giving more power to the decisions and being able to actually make change. Can you talk a little bit about centralization and the transformation you've gone through in that process?
Sure. I think so. There's two things I think would be interesting to talk through. Like one is that, and then the second is like, what do we do now? Right? Like, how do we enable because I can say it till I'm blue in the face, but we have to have alignment at on the business side to be able to change it. And that's something that we still need to do a lot of work on. So like I said, 1,800 channels, lots of people globally, hands on keys kind of thing, and creating a ton of content. And so the way that we were set up as a marketing function was you had a number of disciplines that had been established kind of in CHQ, right? Like we had a social discipline that I was leading. There's an analytics discipline, a content discipline, field marketing.
CHQ, just for the audience, CHQ.
Corporate headquarters. Sorry. So like, centrally making some decisions to have these disciplines, or kind of call them functional areas of expertise, right? And that's what they were. Like we built internal teams that had subject matter experts on topics like content creation, social strategy, influencers, social enablement, this, that, and the other thing. And then you had a couple hundred people around the world that didn't report to us, right? Like they reported into different businesses, different lines of leadership and the geographies. And so in the past, we'd have our all hands calls globally, get 200 people on the call, and we'd talk through best practices and all the data that we see, and encouraging people to make different kinds of decisions with their content. But they don't really answer to us, right? Like they answer to the people that are paying their paycheck or have a specific initiative that they're trying to drive. And so you'd get a lot of like, yeah, we get it, we agree. And then they'd follow that up by not listening to it or implementing it. Mm-hmm. And so now what we've done is we've taken all those resources globally and we've centralized them into one group that does report up into us, right? Mm-hmm. So now I've built an organization that's kind of comprised of two parts. One is all of the channels that we still and will manage moving forward, like the master brand, our cloud businesses, like other things like that, and key geographies. And then the other staff is really like a COE or like internal agency, right? Like I have a director that sits over that entire organization, and that's a team of people that are influencer specialists. And so we've centralized them instead of having them scattered across the organization, or creative strategists. And so that's kind of enabling us to not only like drive the car a little bit, but to help like provide support. Because I think another part of creative transformation that I was really focused on is, do we have a consistent staffing model for any channel or thing that we want to manage, right? So you could have one team inside of a really well-funded business unit that has 9 people on it, really well-funded, has some agency resources, they got what they need. And you might have another where it's like half of a person who's also doing some digital strategy and performance marketing. And it's like, you can't actually drive results by not being consistent. So that's been a really big part of what I would say like centralizing has been about for us, is like providing that shared services model so that we can elevate the work that those channel managers are doing. And then the part that we're still working on, and we've got a long way to go because it's never going to stop, is our need to be great enablers outside of marketing, outside of social, right? Like, am I doing enough as a leader to get in front of business leadership, or to work with communications, or with HR or legal, to like bring that vision forward? We've spent a lot of time enabling ourselves, the social teams, to be better at what they do, and to understand our vision and mission. But I don't think we're doing enough to drive creative transformation outside of marketing. And that's really where we have to go if we want it to be successful long term.
Yeah, it's a really important point I think you're making around how the centralization allows you to make choices based on the learnings and the data. It gives you more power in that sense. And then it does set you up for enablement, and that idea of just an organization, a group of experts being able to empower the organization in a new way, to help them leverage these channels and almost turn it into, your own influencers, turn them into marketing leaders for you. And I think it's also an interesting, agency services that brands employ. That idea of not just getting assets from them, but you might be getting enablement from them, right? You might be able to help empower. So it's great that you're doing so. Centralization, helping transform your business in terms of the aggregation of your experts, the ability to act on channels, and then the ability to enable. One question I would ask is, when you talked about it, one channel might have a large group of people, another might have a half a person. But you can imagine on a campaign or for a business unit or a product launch or announcement, you've got sort of disparate parties, right? You've got the LinkedIn experts, you've got the podcast team, you've got maybe some paid advertising that's going to happen. Can you talk a little bit about how centralization has transformed work and people in terms of working better together?
Yeah, sure. And I think so, like outside of my organization, that sort of effort on centralization has happened everywhere, right? So we've taken all of the designers, animators, like video, like this, that, and the other thing from a production and creative standpoint. And that has been centralized into one internal creative agency called Blue Studio. So now instead of, again, like disparate resources spread around, it's like one big team. We've also seen that from a content strategy perspective, from a performance marketing perspective with media. So like there's a massive effort around like, how do we like pull all that talent into their own sort of centralized groups, but then what's the workflow between all of them, right? Because in the old model, and I'm sure people on this call experience this, you have this baton passing effect when you're not working in an integrated way, where content strategy writes a brief, but they don't really know social. And then they hand us a thing to put it on social. And we're like, wait, that doesn't look like social. And so we're spending more time thinking, like, well, how do you remove the baton and create a working model where people are coming together? So one example of that, and there's, I don't know, a few, is one of the two leaders over the Blue Studio brought forward a concept called a 360 review. And we have some large campaigns that we're working on. And so the notion of this was like, how do we show the work like
top of funnel all the way to the bottom of funnel, from a TV spot all the way down to the email, like in one room, in one experience at the same time with all the stakeholders. And you have to like look at it and actually assess, does this work hang together really well, right? And so that in its purest form is a 4-hour in-person meeting that happens like once a month kind of thing. But it's also like doing that regularly over virtual, which is frankly a little bit more painful, but it's been amazing to be able to see how things can literally be threaded through. And when it doesn't, you're able to kind of like address it in real time versus, you know, the batons get passed and then there's something lost in translation and then work gets made and shipped. And then you look back, you're like, wait a second, that didn't quite look right. And there's been times where I've seen us do that on smaller scales with some of our large partnerships where we might have, you know, the advertising team working on a piece and then socials working on a piece and the partnerships team is working on a piece. Geographies are working on something. And then they all go out to launch around a big event like Wimbledon or the Masters or something like that we were a big part of. And it just doesn't look like we did it together. And it's because we didn't, right? And so the new model, like this creative transformation, allows us to actually be able to finish the work and ship it and like stamp it with we actually did this together. And so that's been a really kind of powerful change that we've been able to implement.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That integrated team approach. How do you integrate, you mentioned markets. Are markets part of that 360 review or leading markets, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little complicated with so many geographies, but they are invited and included to participate in the 360s. We also have kind of standalone geo-specific calls. So like, you know, one night it's Japan, APAC, and all of that. And then in one morning it's EMEA. And so we're able to kind of focus on those markets. And so from the 360 perspective, that's how that's kind of playing out. And that's not easy. And then, you know, for my organization, it's a little bit of the same. Like I've named someone in my team that works in Australia to be our kind of managing editor over all things geos, but we have some really, really talented social strategy leaders in EMEA and APAC. And so Edwin's job is like, just spend time working with them, look at data together, figure out what you want to change, what you don't. Like, let's start to actually orchestrate that. And then my biggest effort, like this week, everything changes all the time, is, okay, now that I have this new model, I have a centralized editorial calendar for master brand through all of our big kind of other, call it business unit or product channels that we want to focus on. That's one calendar now. It used to be however many, right? And then you've got to like, all right, well, what's the geo overlay on top of that? What's the communications overlay on top of that? And like, when you look at it, like, do we look like we're being consistent? Do we look like we're expressing what IBM's biggest priorities are? Or do we look like it's a free for all? Because in the past, it was a free for all. And there's just, you know, we don't need to do a free for all. We can be much more diligent about it. Yeah.
Are you, and I think it's just to elaborate, get more, a little more specific for people. So when you bring this 360 review, are you also including the external agencies? Are you including analytics, media? Like how does everyone get together? Is it everyone? And, you know, how does
it's literally meant to be everyone. Like, you know, if you're the advertising agency that's leading the development of a new campaign and all this stuff, like, you're supposed to be on and participating. If you're one of our social agencies, like you're on, you may be presenting, you may just be listening, so you hear all the other context around it. You know, and then the same with geography. So it's really meant to be like all hands on deck, right? And so that's hard to do. But I think another part of creative transformation, or just something that I've observed as of late, is like, we don't spend enough time actually looking at creative, right? Like, we spend a lot of time building spreadsheets and strategies and asset matrices and all these things. But then, like, how much time am I spending like really looking at the creative and like having a discussion about it and what could be better, or should we, you know, just like really getting to the practice of craftsmanship. Like, that's something I want to figure out how to be better and better at as we get through this, because like, I believe that's where the work really transforms. You know, you have to have the right systems in place in order to make it possible, but then you have to commit to like
the hard work of like, I'm going to get better at this craft, and I'm going to spend time with my team trying to like massage this stuff into something, world class.
Yeah, you've talked about in our pregame call. You talked a little bit about once you hang all the work on the wall, you can start to see how this Instagram ad takes someone to this landing page, which takes them to this white paper or some sort of asset, and just that, again, that journey. And then people can truly say, well, does this feel like one story? Are we communicating that way? I think that's an incredibly effective way to collaborate. Really tough on remote. But it's great that the centralization has empowered you to do that.
Yeah, one of the things to that point that I've been most excited about in the new model was one of the leaders over advertising, as we're kind of like working through some stuff together, was like, we need to figure out how to be omni-channel, right? Like, we want it to look like it's connected, but we also don't want matching luggage. And I think that was kind of it was great for us to all feel empowered to do that, and to go back and say, okay, this is great TV, but great TV may not be the best thing for an Instagram story, right? Like, they're just not the same thing. And so then we get to be creative about how we take that idea and like turn that into something that we're excited about putting onto Instagram stories. And so like one of the we spend a lot of time thinking of cheeky phrases so that we remember them. And we've been talking about this notion of like IBM, I think in general has historically been pretty good at omni-channel. Like if we have a campaign or a thing, like you see it everywhere. Like we're good at getting it everywhere it needs to go. And I think a lot of enterprises are, but like how good are we at like made for the medium? So like that's become like the call to action. It's like omni-channel, but made for the medium. And like that's really hard to do really well. But it's the right thing for our audiences, because if you're on Twitter and you see like a blatant TV ad being used as an organic piece of social content, you're like, that was lazy. So like you have to spend, time and energy trying to be creative with that stuff.
That's great call out. One of the areas, so you talk about enablement, and just to go back to enablement for a moment. So the centralization of resources, it allows you to shift to marketing and social from being the creators of the assets, so to speak, to the experts and the enablers. And I want, you talked a little bit about the 3 levels of advocacy, and this idea of, I just think, the more you can get the organization to do your job as a marketer, the better, right? Word of mouth, leveraging their own networks, especially in social. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned there and how this transformation has helped empower and move that forward?
Yeah. So from a B2B perspective, at least with what we see, when we do a good job with activating internal influencers, we see an exponential impact compared to owned organic, right? So like the example that I share a lot internally is, we had this large conference every year, or it used to be an in-person, right now it's virtual. Hopefully it goes back to in-person, called Think. And it's like, before the pandemic, it's a 30,000 person event. And then virtually it's like way more, but just virtual attendance, right? But outside of that big conference where we go huge on influencers, huge on paid, huge on all, there's also these like localized Think events like in the UK or wherever. And the team in the UK did, they did what they do. They created editorial calendar for the event to promote it, pre, during, and post, all that stuff, and call it maybe 100 assets, right? And then they also worked with a few key influencers inside of the company, so internal influencers, to promote the event and invite their network to attend. And what they found was that the influencers drove 6 times the amount of registration to the event versus 100. That's like a couple posts versus 100 assets, right? So, I'm really big on the role of influencers in B2B marketing, and particular internal influencers. So we have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out, with limited resources and people on my staff, like where do we focus, right? And so Ryan Bears, who leads our global influencer program, and that team have kind of put together this framework for like, okay, what are the different groups? And so we've built it into 3 groups. Like one is like call it tier 1 SVP exec at IBM level, like they're,
titans of business, right? Some of the smartest people on the planet, running research for IBM or whatever it could be, and amazing credibility and expertise. And they could be doing more on social. And so that's one layer of how do we go invest time and enable them and work with their executive communications teams to help them be more successful in driving their own personal brand and eminence, because that creates fruit for IBM, right? Like people want to hear from Dario Gil, who's the head of research for IBM. Like he's got a lot of credibility, certainly more than a lot of our organic channels do, right? Layer 2 is like, there are a number of IBMers that maybe they're not an SVP, but they are world-class in research or in consulting. They already have a large network of people. They're socially active. They, all that stuff. And like, we need to activate them. We need to support them, amplify them, put more energy into them. Like, there's a lot we can do there. And that's a big partnership with communications to make that happen. We did some research with one of our agencies, and they like kind of went out and audited, like, who are the top 300, IBM's like 260,000 people. So who are the top 250 to 300 IBMers in terms of their like level of influence and engagement? And so we have that list now. So now we can build a program around that. The third layer is like, and there may be one in between 2 and 3, but we've got it to 3. Number 3 is like everybody else, right? Like, there is LinkedIn B2B, there is a lot of power in building engagement on that platform with your employees. Like, we see it all the time. Like, you just get one person started and they are all engaging with each other, and then their network's seeing it, and then business connections are made. Like, it's really, really powerful. And so there's a huge opportunity there. But do I have time with my 5-person influencer team to go enable everybody? Probably not. But can I develop curriculum and make that more of a self-service type of thing where you can go? So we have this, it's like a 6-module, social eminence training, where it's everything from like, and first we did 101 level. This year we're doing 201 level, but how to set up a profile on LinkedIn, how to create content, how to build a network, how to engage, and what types of things you should be doing, how to play with, like all that stuff. And so like, I'm really excited because that has moved not just from my organization, but like our leadership and development organization is working on that with us, and communications is working on that with us. So we can start to like build a program, but we don't have to like drive it in perpetuity. And the thing there is like, it's great if they get involved. It's great if they fuel the algorithm, but can they drive as much of an impact as layer 1 and 2? No. Right. So like, we're going to focus our time more in those areas and do what we can on level 3.
Is it something like the level 1 is 80% of the success, level 2 is 15%? What are the breakdowns there in terms of how the tier, your SVP exec influencers, percent of reach is that?
So I would say right now, I mean, I don't have data to support this. This would be like a total hunch. I would say right now, layer 2 is probably driving more of an impact because it's a larger group of people that are more regularly active. There's a lot of energy and excitement around how we can better partner with the executive ranks to help them. Like, I think if we activate that well, that will start to like overtake the others just because of their reputations, right? Like, and our former president, IBM, Jim Whitehurst, like, he was really active on LinkedIn just by nature. Like, he was just trying things and working with his team, and there's just a massive amount of engagement on his content. And so you can see the potential there. But it's also, I don't want to build something with them that's just overly promotional. Like, we need to build a platform for thought leadership where they're not just tweeting random stuff or promoting an announcement. It's like, what do you really think about the implications of X, Y, and Z? Like, that's what we want to hear from people, right? We want to hear them talk about leadership, about culture. We want to hear them talk about what companies are really struggling with in their transformation, or the things that are really complex that go way over my head, like large enterprises migrating their applications across multiple clouds and like understanding that all and organizing the data. Like, there's people that really would love to hear from our experts on that. And so we need to be thoughtful about what we ask them to do and how we help them, turn that into a story versus feeling like, they're just have someone ghostwriting for them or something, like of that nature.
Yeah, it's fascinating because of the size of IBM. You've got such a large volume of those. That's tier two, is a second layer of active influencers who and it's probably also they're more active, and therefore their network is also likely more active.
Sure.
So you've got that ripple effect. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your group's mission statement and sort of strategic principles, just to help us. As we're closing out, we got about 5-7 minutes, and then we'll do, I think, questions from people.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So my old mission statement was our team was to create content and conversation that constitutes time well spent for anyone that encounters it, right? So like, are you making things that people signal to us that it's valuable? Are they engaging? Are they doing things with it? And as we started the new model, and we started centralizing everything, like one of the clear objectives that we have from like our CEO all the way down is like, we need our audiences to understand what IBM does. Like there is a lot of, people like, well, what does IBM even do anymore? And the reality is that like IBM is like underneath a lot of companies, enabling them to like transform the world, right? Like credit card transactions running on IBM's systems and software. So we kind of came together and it's like, well, let's write something a little different. So our mission statement is to create content and conversation that is audience-led, evidence-based, and tailored for the channel, right? And like audience-based is really intentional because we find that we're often not necessarily creating content because we know the audience is looking for it, but it's because we got something to say, right? Like we have a thing that's launching, we've got a thing. And so it's like, well, how do you really treat the audience best with your content creation or with your social listening and engagement? And then evidence-based is just, I don't know, I think a lot of B2B companies struggle with this, us included, is like, are you teaching or are you preaching, right? Like, are you showing or are you telling? And like, we've got to be better about really showcasing what IBM can do through demonstrational content, educational content, and like creating and using evidence. Like evidence is one of the things, like in addition to having a strong relationship with an audience, evidence is what can drive belief. So if you're not building a relationship and like proving to people what you are, then you're not going to win with your audience. And then tailored for the channel is super simple, right? Like Instagram isn't LinkedIn, LinkedIn's not a blog, the blog's not Reddit, like they're all different. And the approach to them should be treated as such. Otherwise you get yourselves in like with Reddit in a really bad situation potentially, or in just a sea of apathy where everything does look like matching luggage from Twitter to LinkedIn to Instagram to YouTube. And audiences sniff that out and they go to those platforms for very specific reasons. And so we're trying to be more thoughtful about how those things come to life. And so the strategic principles are, number one is to be data-led. I don't say data-driven because I think we're often like gaming the system with data. Like we're just playing to the numbers versus saying like the data shows us this. So let's allow that to move us forward in a different way. So for every like big campaign right now, we start with conversational analysis on social, and that provides us insights into a couple audiences, 2-3 audiences potentially, where they hang out, what channels are important to them, what are they talking about as it relates to that specific conversation. And then we allow that to move us forward versus being like, we got to go drive against these KPIs, right? The second is focus. And we've been talking about this the whole time. Like, do you want to spend your time 50-50 on influencers versus organic localized content? Or do you feel like you're going to get more out of influencers? Or do you feel like you're going to get more out of, Instagram than you do on Facebook right now? Like, so that's a really specific one. Edit and amplify is just about, that's number 3. That's really meant to say, you don't need 32,000 organic assets a year, right? That's how many we published in 2020. Yeah, 2020. We look at the data and we find that 25% of all organic visits to IBM.com in that same year came from 32 posts. That's 0.01% of all of the assets published around the world through all the channels we're managing. It's like, we know what kinds of content people want. We know what resonates. It's really, really big news in the industry or with IBM, or it's cultural connections. Like we had a massive year in 2020 because IBM had so many things related to COVID going on. We had created this high performance computing consortium through Dario Gil. We had like some massive client opportunities through that, and just people just engaged in trying to solve problems around COVID. And so as we were connected to culture, because that was culture happening in real time, when we activated around that, thousands of people come to our website, right? And so it's like edit. But then when you find those things to edit, we have to be better about amplification. Like without amplification, like there is just no scale for B2B branded content, really. Like you get it a few times here and there, but it's like, so now we've moved in this model called no regrets that I could speak to in a second. The third is co-creation. We're moving away from that baton model, requires us not to have a seat at the kitchen, but not a seat at the table, but a role in the kitchen. And then I guess the last one is just experimentation. So like launching TikTok last year, we've always been talking about it. We see like there's an opportunity, especially connect with a younger demographic and do educational content or like life at IBM type content. But we were managing 82 Facebook pages, like globally 2 years ago. So it's like, that allows us to have more experimentation in market, whether it's paid or whatever. Going back to the amplify thing, and it's like focus and amplification. So as we were kind of starting this journey of transformation, I had a call with our head of performance marketing and analytics. And he's like, what's something that you would test if you could test anything? Like, you've got all this data, like what would you do like if you had no regrets? And the program's called No Regrets. And we just pilot it and we tested it. I said, what? And we're kind of jokingly said, why maybe just shut off Twitter like for a while? We like so many of our channels, like they don't have the reach that we used to have. There's not a ton of engagement there, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, but what I would do is I would put a little bit of money on each piece of content, because we've done this on Facebook before. We've seen that when we just put a little bit against it, we can drive really strong results, as opposed to feeling like we have to publish so much. So the premise of the pilot was pretty simple. Each of our sort of core offerings got one tweet a week, right? You get one tweet a week. That tweet gets $5,000. And we want that content to be social first in nature. So it looks like it belongs on social. It doesn't look like a digital banner, right? And so what we found, and we didn't assess creative. We were just like, just go do the test. We'll talk about making the creative better later, but like, just go do it. Let's just go test it. So with, I would say, decent content and $5,000 per post, what we found is we could have created more engagement and visitation to IBM with 22 tweets than that same handle could produce in an entire year of organic content. So I'm not saying you like walk away from organic entirely, but it's just about this recognition that like they kind of all belong together. You need to prioritize your messaging. You need to create better content that fits social. And then you should, if you feel like it's important enough, you should put a little bit of investment behind it to make sure that it can be seen and can be engaged in and can create a result. And so like that's something that has proven itself to be true, and we're adapting the model a little bit, but like that's going to be a part of creative transformation moving forward. Is like we are going to invest in that no regrets workflow or program through this year to just see how it continues to perform for us.
Excellent. How has TikTok been going? Have you found any breakout successes?
So it's been really interesting. There is what we found, like the team, a few people from our team kind of came to one of our social leaders, Renee Edwards, and was like, we really want to do TikTok. We really want to do TikTok. And so we're like, all right, well, like put some thoughts down on paper. And so they were really smart about it. And they really kind of looked at what was already on the platform from an IBM perspective. People are talking about their experiences, good and bad, frankly, but like there was a lot of like brand there and often very positive expressions of the brand. And so it's like, we should just start with like what we call social CX, this is community management, social listening, react and engage with them, right? And so like the first thing we found was there's this guy doing sand art on TikTok, and he was doing sand art and he just randomly did the IBM logo. I don't know if an IBMer asked for it or what, but he did the IBM logo in sand art. That is badass. And so the team just reached out and was like, hey, can we publish this on Instagram Reels? And so he was like, sure. So we did that. We tagged him. That was our most engaged in piece of organic content we have ever published in terms of amounts of, is crazy. So like, okay, there's something going on here. And like, if people want to, shout out to @IBM on TikTok, go check it out. I mean, I think it's a lot of fun because we can be we can experiment more. I think we can show people a little bit more behind the scenes in ways that feel like really TikTok appropriate. Like tech talk is a thing, right? Like people love to see and learn about quantum computers and different things. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And so, yeah, I think it's going really, really well. I want to see us do even more there. I think like this notion of experimentation is really powerful because the things that we're testing there can often translate into other areas, like especially Instagram, because they stole the same idea. But, you know, it's like there is a clear path to like learning what resonates with audiences and what's trending there, and then moving that into another channel to see if it's effective. I've seen, this is maybe my most random and fun story related to TikTok, but I think it's just an indication of the power of influencers. I learned about an IBMer who's over in EMEA. He's in sales, he's not in social, who had just kind of started getting involved on TikTok as a way to like create content about his role at IBM and the things that he was responsible for selling related. I think it's like IBM Storage's business. And he took those videos and he started publishing them on LinkedIn, you know, and it's like him dancing and doing, it's like stuff that I'm like, me as an old guy, I'm like, I don't know if that's going to work, but I was like, I wanted to meet him because he's incredibly creative. And so I had a call with him a couple weeks ago, and he was like, you know, like I never knew how much that would build my network as just some person that's new in his career and trying to, you know, make connections. But he is now going to like industry events, like sales conferences and whatever. And people are like, hey, are you the guy that dances on TikTok? And so he's literally, he met someone that said that to him. And then at the end of the day, he was able to broker a meeting with his boss and this random person who just saw him on TikTok through LinkedIn. And so I'm like, that's crazy. That's crazy. So there's this whole new, like, how do you address that? How do you enable that, but stay brand safe? Like all the things, you know?
It's fascinating. A fantastic story. Do you have a process for, as you have TikTok experts and then as you're trying to enable, is it something where you could, you know, help people learn how to leverage TikTok for personal networking, which you know also benefits the business? Is that sort of the loop that you're trying to create?
Well, we haven't gotten to that from a TikTok perspective. I think we're really focused right now on like the LinkedIn side of that. I probably need to just hire the guy I just mentioned to come do that for TikTok, which I should do. But yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity. I think there's also, while there are some standout cases of that, there's also examples where you're like, you know, I don't know about that use of that thing. So it's, you know, I sit between this like interesting space of how much do I want to encourage TikTok from a brand perspective? Like, I think because with individuals, what I really want people to feel is like they feel comfortable and empowered to express themselves in social and share what they love about IBM or about their experience or their clients or their partners, right? Like, I want that to happen. What I don't want is there's this like, all of a sudden people look at what we do from an enablement perspective and they're like, well, IBM's saying that we should all get on TikTok and do dancing videos. That's not what we're saying. So we got to be a little careful about what we stand up and how we do it, but I do think it's a huge opportunity.
That's fantastic. It sounds like it's a great opportunity for you, but I understand the need to be cautious. We have, I think we're towards the end of the time. I do think that, you know, we've got a bunch of learnings. The centralization helped, you know, with that catalyst of creative transformation for you. You brought up the idea of radical change. You know, if you're going to, anything less than radical just isn't enough. You talked about how centralizing the work across creative production and across social enabled you to have these integrated agency teams or integrated teams, and then how also I mean, I think that the amount of assets created and then finding that there's this small number of assets that make massive impact and therefore trying to do less. You know, what would you do if you could do anything and not get in trouble with it? The no regrets program, another great catalyst for creative transformation for people. There are a couple questions here. So being a lot of Gen Z people are on TikTok, what effect do you think that generation will have on corporations and brands as they move into leadership roles down the line?
I mean, I think it's I don't know if it's really any different than what we've seen as people have come into roles of leadership, having grown up with Facebook or with Instagram or Twitter or whatever, right? Like I started my career and those things didn't exist. And so as people have come into roles of leadership, they understand those platforms better than me, right? Like I have perspective, but like I don't pretend to know more than the people that are on my team. Like they're the experts on the platforms and they understand how to best connect with audiences there. And I think TikTok is really similar, right? Like they're going to come into the workplace and become leaders, understanding storytelling in like a really in a really interesting way. I think TikTok too is like people that are really good at TikTok really understand like how to play the algorithm the right ways, which like that's still, I'm still trying to figure all of that out. And I think, and so I think that's going to be huge. I think it's a massive advantage for anyone that can kind of find people that are interested in experimenting on those platforms and are looking at how to best, leverage content to build relationships with